Welcome to Reaction with me, Ian Martin, editor of Reaction, and my colleague Maggie Pagano. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, just hit the subscribe button below. We're also joined, I should say, by Ziggy the dog.
Ziggy Stardust.
Ziggy Stardust. One of the perils of working from home is that it's sometimes difficult to record. But anyway, well, hopefully Ziggy will be well behaved. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction, just hit subscribe on the button below on YouTube. If you're listening to this on our podcast, thank you for joining. Maggie, we're just going to have a quick chat, aren't we, on the Tory leadership contenders, which might sound a little bit premature to some people, maybe not, considering the events of the last week or so in terms of Partygate and the scandal that is engulfing Boris Johnson. But we just thought it would be a good idea to run through what the potential is, how it would work if there is a leadership contest either this year or actually in the next few weeks, even potentially if the Prime Minister is forced to resign. Just ask you first, Maggie, do you think he can survive? I know we talked about this on our show Press Review, but it's now 24 hours later. It looks worse and worse, doesn't it?
It does look worse and worse. And I think actually the answer to that is probably a numbers one, really, isn't it? I mean, the feeling, the spirit of the time is that no, he won't survive. But if there is a challenge in the 1922 committee, and we know that 24 letters have gone in, I think is it?
Yeah.
And the committee chairman needs a total of 54 to trigger that challenge.
Yeah.
And then when it goes on, I believe it is half of all the 365 MPs will need to, Boris will need half plus one to survive. Now, you know, half of 365, there are a lot of MPs who do owe their careers at the last election to his campaigning. So would he get half? So I think that's really the question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So it's funny with MPs. I mean, as veteran MPs will always tell you about younger MPs, is that after a year or two in the Commons, they really generally start to convince themselves that they won their seat because of their own,
Of course,
their hard campaigning and their political brilliance. So I'm not sure that would save him.
No, just quickly, what my feeling is, because this is so much down to the MPs, what they've got to think is, quite harshly, if there were an election in a year's time, would they, or in 6 months' time, would they feel confident about selling the party and Boris on the doorstep? That's what it comes down to. When you're out there actually saying, come on, you've got to vote for us, we've done a fantastic job, vaccines, levelling up, blah, blah, will they be able to defend Partygate?
Yes, that's no, that's their problem. And I think potentially the most significant thing that's happened since the Prime Minister attempted to apologise, sort of half apologise to the House of Commons on Wednesday at Prime Minister's questions, the vote by the office bearers, unanimous vote, 10-0, in the Sutton Coldfield constituency, which is the constituency of Andrew Mitchell, former Chief Whip. Andrew Mitchell had advised them, the office bearers plus the leader of the town council, to wait until the famed Sue Gray's report came out. And they said, thank you very much, but no, ignored that advice and went ahead with a vote, a unanimous vote in a seat which has a majority of more than 17,000, an ultra-safe Tory seat, which I think I'm right in saying the local constituency association was for Boris in the leadership contest. I'll have to check that, but I'm writing about it later. Think it was. So for them to say, look, essentially, they can't campaign for this guy. These are the activists, the foot soldiers who give up their time mainly for free because they think it matters, because they think that Toryism is the best and most balanced approach to the nation's affairs. That's what they believe. And they have essentially said the guy's got to go. So I think that if that starts to spread across other constituency associations, the feedback, apparently, one MP was telling me, coming from outraged constituents, is particularly bad in parts of the Red Wall, or where there's still a strong Labour presence, and the Tories might have only won by a few thousand votes, because there's still an active Labour presence there. They
Presence,
hope
of
to
course.
win back those seats at the next general election, so they can then email voters, use Facebook advertising, all of that sort of stuff to say, look, this is what your local MP is associated with. The people who designed the laws on COVID, which were draconian, then broke the laws. So we'll see. Shall we just have a quick spin through contenders? No hard and fast decisions at this time, but just people at Westminster this week, people are discussing this all the time. How would the alliances form? Who would the front runners be? So I think we drew up a list, didn't we, Maggie, at the beginning? We'll go through some of the biggest names first. Obviously, Sunak is in one sense the front runner, though Truss is actually more popular. The polling shows with Tory activists, so that can fluctuate. But so it seems to be Sunak the Chancellor versus Truss the Foreign Secretary. How do you rate their relative strengths and weaknesses?
This is not original, but I read somewhere that it was quite a good line. It might well have been Fraser Nelson this morning in the Telegraph, that Liz Truss has everyone would think she's fantastic, but actually she hasn't achieved very much. Her PR is greater than what she's actually achieved. And I think that's probably true. She's sort of come from nowhere. What do I think? I still don't get a sense from either of them of the story that they would tell the public to persuade them, or even to the Tory MPs. Be very hard for Rishi Sunak now to give the low tax, small state philosophical argument. Liz Truss has probably that. She is very much coming from the free market, small state. She's been very outspoken on wokery and minorities. So she's got perhaps more of a hinterland in a sense than Rishi. My own feeling is that they're both sort of almost too obvious, that it will be one of the outliers, if you like, that might creep forward. Stranger things have happened in Tory leadership. So the other people we thought about, well, I think Jeremy Hunt will obviously have a go. Nadeem Sadawi.
Let me just just quickly on Sunak. I think I think that's right on Truss, and the problem that Liz Truss has is that while she does represent that kind of free market side of the argument, which I know a lot of people who would find that in theory appealing, but the hurdle that she's got to overcome is just a sense of feeling among, and this is where opinion polling and focus groups will really count, and people will look, what does the public think of these people? Most of the public doesn't know who Liz Truss is at the moment, and when they're introduced to her, do they look at her and think, no, you've got to be joking, that's not a prime minister? So that's her battle. Her battle is to convince sufficient Tory MPs and then Tory members that the public wouldn't make her spectacularly unpopular very quickly. That's the risk with her, and even people who like Liz Truss concede that. On the Sunak front, on one level, he's automatically obviously appealing, relatively popular still with the public because of what happened during the pandemic and all of the measures which were introduced, furlough, etc. And his difficulty is what he's done on tax policy since the budget and measures which are hugely unpopular with Tory MPs, and they calculate Tory voters or floating voters, because taxes are about to go up and Sunak will get some of the blame. So his problem is that while he looks on one level notionally appealing, he's clearly a well-adjusted, straightforward, intelligent person with good communication skills.
And highly ethical. I think he gives the sense of being very moral, highly ethical background. Don't you sense?
Seems to be, yeah. But is Britain ready for a billionaire prime minister? Just pose that question.
Well, at least he could pay for his own wallpaper. Actually, I think that perhaps
that would be an advance. He buys his own furniture, which is a phrase used in previous Tory contests. But yes, but I just pose that as a question mark. There's obviously the potential for opponents and for the media to ask lots of questions about sort of family wealth and connections. So there's that danger. But he has a plausible public presence and could be really quite popular. The problem he has is what he's actually done as Chancellor, and his attempts to distance himself from his own measures by trying to say, look, I'm really the free market, low tax person. A bigger boy next door made me do all this stuff in the budget in terms of increasing spending and increasing taxes. Doesn't sound very plausible. Brings me on to someone who various people keep assuring me doesn't stand a chance, but actually I think is a really strong contender, is Jeremy Hunt.
Yeah.
He has his critics, but he fought a good campaign last time, and I've heard it floated for the first time this week at Westminster several times. Wouldn't Sunak be better, relative youth, of doing some kind of deal with Hunt, either to remain as Chancellor or to become Foreign Secretary? That on a stop Liz Truss basis. What do you make of Hunt's chances?
No, I agree. I think he's the sort of quiet, he's behaved relatively well during the pandemic, not too critical, helpful, and has been critical where necessary. But yeah, I think he would be sort of almost the boring, is the John Major of the in a sense coming through versus Heseltine and Hurd in post Thatcher, isn't he? He handles himself very well as Foreign Secretary. He's got a bit more of a backstory now, hasn't he? Speaks, let me get it right, Japanese. And I sense maybe sort of bringing Sunak on side, and maybe Penny Mordaunt, who I think is a face we should have seen much more of than cabinet, and Boris has not treated incredibly well. You could see quite a small group there emerging, couldn't you?
And then there's also other names to consider. In fact, we're obviously, because we're doing this as a short video, Maggie. There's loads.
There are loads.
The moment you get into it, there's tons more to discuss. So let's say that we'll talk about this again after the weekend, when we've seen what the Sunday papers bring, and might have a sort of clearer sense of it. But yes, you're right. You mentioned some other names there. I would flag up Nadhim Zahawi, Education Secretary, who was Vaccine Minister. One of his friends said to me he would be astonished if Nadhim ran. I think this is politics, and I'd be astonished if he doesn't run, if he comes to it. The Boris loyalist, and also the candidate who could say, look, he was a Boris loyalist and a great man. I didn't say that. I put that in quote marks. This great man, a great election victor, Boris Johnson, has been treated shabbily and removed by the Tory party. So there might be some mileage in that. For a candidate getting the votes of people like his friend Nadine Dorries and other Brexiteers on that basis.
Loyal.
Because the way it all works, and we'll talk about this more next week, the precise process, but the way it kind of works is you get a mad Grand National style launch at the beginning with all manner of people running just to try and chance their arm, or partly out of egotism, or to put down a marker for the future. And in those circumstances, I'd be astonished if Nadhim Zahawi didn't do it. So then also to flag up a real serious contender for the future, has enemies, but also has a lot of supporters and admirers, is Tom Tugendhat. Maybe too early, but I would be surprised if Tom Tugendhat doesn't run. Mark Harper from the back benches, on former minister and anti-COVID restrictions campaigner, will, I would imagine, run. I'm not sure how many votes he would get on that basis. You said Penny Mordaunt. Question mark against Gove.
Yes, I was going to ask you what you thought.
Defending Boris, very talented reforming minister. Unlikely that the Tory members would vote for him after what happened in 2016. But it's politics, and why not? Or will he decide, if Boris falls, to do a deal with
somebody like Hunt,
with Sunak or Hunt, to stop Truss? But we'll see. So shall we wrap it up there on that basis? That's our kind of lightning run through the first phase of it. And let's have a longer discussion next week, Maggie, shall we, on the Tory leadership, which, considering everything that's happening and the pace that revelations are coming out about the Prime Minister, and number 10, the Tory leadership race could be quicker, it could be sooner than people realise. So thank you for tuning in. You're watching Reaction on YouTube, or you're listening on our weekly podcast. More details below on how to become a Reaction member. You get my weekly newsletter on politics, Maggie's column on business, and lots of other things. My column this week will obviously be on the Tory leadership and all sorts of extraordinary things going on at Westminster. Until next time, thank you for listening.